Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am the stepson of Krypton.
And I'm Mantis.
And today we wanted to talk about kind of an interesting article that had been released from James Gunn in regards to, obviously, if you've been with us for a little bit, you've seen a lot of our videos thus far on his vision and rebooting of the DC universe, as now known as the DCU. But they're obviously, we know that James Gunn with the Guardians of the Galaxy through Marvel, he's kind of been in both universes, right? And he's wanting to avoid probably the biggest problem I think that Marvel has, right? He's wanting to avoid that with his new recreation of the DC. Mantis, do you want to go over what that problem is?
Yeah. In that Slash Films article, he was quoted. Here's his quote because we'll set this up. To be frank, I think the better Marvel movies do, it's better for DC. And the better DC movies do, it's better for Marvel. When people see bad movies, they don't want to spend more money on seeing more movies. So do you want good movies to happen? Or so you do want good movies to happen. So he's wanted to make great movies. Obviously, no one sets out to make a bad movie. But he came from the MCU,
sure about
from
that?
Marvel Studios.
I'm invincible. Your powers only make me stronger.
Well, I mean, you would hope not, but I guess like Disney sometimes makes decisions that makes you think otherwise. But at least James Gunn doesn't want to do that. Coming from the Marvel Studios, he sees how these movies are made, right? And one of the things that we've talked about too is I know one of the reasons I love DC Comics so much is because their villains are so great. And so the question has to be asked: does the MCU have a villain problem? In many of those films that we've seen, specifically in the past, 5 years or so, the villains have been bland. They're not that deep. There's no character development. They have there's just revenge, or they have imperial aspirations, right? They just want power. And sometimes you do have actors that can salvage some of that, but they're effectively poorly written. And I don't think it's necessarily poorly written from a comic book perspective. Like, it's not like they're just poorly written in the comics. I think it's just they're poorly written in the movies.
Here's the thing with that, real quick. Now, we released a video after it was in 2023, after the Marvels released, about how, and one of the things we discussed was the villain is basically an exact copy of Ronan the Destroyer, except female. Okay, and then we'd said that like it was kind of like, wow, you literally just made a female version of this. And we did have a comment in there that said, well, yeah, they're of basically the same order, the same, they come from the same group. So yes, they're going to look similar. And while I do appreciate the comment, I'm not hating on the person who commented that. Like, yes, I get that, right? I'm not saying that, that doesn't make sense that they don't look the same. What I'm saying is basically you have the same fucking villain, and there's all these other Marvel villains that you have yet to explore. And if that's it, if you didn't have anything else, right, just like Mantis said, then you have a villain problem. If you have to regurgitate the same type of, it's a different villain, though, because it's a female, even though that's why they have the same looking hammer and all of that. And that's, what I brought up was, they have the same hammer, just smaller version that Ronan had. And I get, yes, they come from the same group, but it's still the same villain. Okay.
Yeah.
You still have a villain problem.
Well, and something else from this article, their argument was, maybe you have a more so than a generic bad guy or generic villain issue, you have a story problem, right? But the funny thing is, they said like the world of superheroes is typically universal of moral absolutes. Like, you have heroes and you have villains, and they fight, right? And they solve those problems by beating the shit out of each other and killing, right? Like that's how the movies go. But with that, like the MCU hasn't wanted to reach outside of what is in the comics. They haven't wanted to explore uh, ad- additional adventures inside those traditional comic book boundaries. So all they end up doing is featuring more and more. Either in your case, like you were talking about with the Ronan character, like it's the same character. It's bland. It's the same thing, and or they escalate the power and then you get what happens in the Eternals. Right? Like, and then now it's this crazy shit. And so, like, like Gunn was quoted also, he criticized the universe-wide cataclysm in the Infinity War when Thanos does the snap, right? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. You act like you want to say something. But like,
I was
he was talking about that. Oh, yeah. He's talking about that specifically, like that higher and higher stakes, right? And it's like there's this worldwide universe event that happened, and this is his quote. And in truth, everybody should be stark raving mad at this point. So it's hard to write stories in the wake of that, right? Which is why the Guardians movies, which of course he directed, have been so much easier to write because they're outside of that massive, all-engulfing event that is so massive and effective, like it affects everything. Well, this is kind of outside that bubble, so it's easier to make stories and write stories about that. And that's where it's talking about a villain problem as well as a story problem, because you can't write these massive, DC, it would be Flashpoint, right? If you make these massive events happen, all of a sudden everything gets harder to make, right? The stories get harder.
Well, here's the thing. And you think about this, okay? In Man of Steel on the DC side, you had Zod and Superman fighting. And they leveled up. There's some question about how much of Metropolis they leveled. From the viewpoint, it looked like they leveled a okay chunk. But then again, it also makes Metropolis look massive, right? So you're like, percentage-wise, guys, I'm sorry, I don't have the percentage of how much Metropolis they destroyed in Man of Steel. It was a decent amount. They said it was like 2,000 some people that had died. Okay, so it was a decent amount, right? That was a tragedy, right? That was not to bring it up, but that was like with us, if you were alive when it happened, and we were when 9/11 happened, right? It was a worldwide tragedy. Everybody, like the entire world, felt that happened, right? And it changed a lot of us. It changed a lot of everything that went on for the next several years, right? Because it was that major of an event. Okay. Now imagine that, and the Man of Steel did the same thing, right? Now imagine you have 50% of all living creatures, and that's just not humans, that's every animal, that's across the entire multiverse, or universe at least in this case, for the snap, gone, right? That's, there's about 7 billion people on this planet. Let's just wipe away 3.5 billion of them. Now, the way people are right now, I'm not totally, not in favor of that idea, but we're not going to get into that. But, like, just imagine that, right? That's a scope unlike any other superhero movie has done. Now, granted, yes, you do bring them back, but yes, that entire time and even after it, the bringing 3.5 billion people back suddenly, the displacement, and they try to do it with the blip and the Spider-Man movies and stuff like that, but like the only where to go from there is reboot, because that was your cataclysmic event. That was the ultimate. You're not going to create anything grander in the MCU than what happened there. Okay, without restarting, and then that, because you're going from there. So all of your other movies seem pale in comparison. Oh, Spider-Man dealt with fucking Doc Ock and Green Goblin came back from a different universe, or he dealt with Mysterio in the one that led directly after the blip. That was and that like
Right.
who the fuck cares? Those stakes are pale in comparison, right? That's like
Right.
if James Gunn, after Superman Legacy, the next movie he releases is The Dark Side, like where Dark Side comes down and just fucking, obliterates Earth, and they have this massive war. Where the fuck do you go
What do you
from
do?
there?
Right. No, you're right. It's like, I mean, honestly, Infinity Wars, like that, the snap was like the crescendo of a normal movie, because you have different acts in movies, right? In stories, in plays, you have this wave, right? And then there's a certain point in a movie, and even in music, it's the same. You have this crescendo to this high point, right? Because you notice the high point because of the low points. If you just stayed at the top the whole time, well, effectively that's now just level, right?
Yes.
Like, so you have to have those points, but the problem is you can't, like, again, when you get to that point, you got to come down. Like, you can't remain there. It's not going to happen. You will not. It's just, you can't. People's attention spans, their excitement, their endorphins, like, it's just not possible. So one, you don't want to start out, right? You don't want to start out on a high note, because then you have nowhere to go but down, right? Or take it higher, which I guess you can't do if you say it's the high point. In Marvel's case, again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that was their high point. It was this massive culmination of several movies, several properties.
This marks the culmination of the past 4 years.
Culmination.
All to this point. And it was awesome, right? It was. But then you have to realize we have to come down. And you need to make it as soft as landing as you can. You don't want it to just fucking crater. Which is what has happened. And it's what James Gunn's talking about, right? Like you said, it's like, what you don't want to encourage there is that superhero fatigue. Like, and again, he talks about this, like he says, superhero fatigue has to do with the kinds of stories that get told. If you lose your eye on the ball, which character, we love Superman, we love Batman, we love Iron Man, because they're these incredible characters we have in our hearts. And if it becomes a bunch of nonsense, which is like, if you're going to stay at that high point, you're going to get all this nonsense.
If there's no ski at the end of the root word, then we would just be idiots saying nonsense.
Of massive entities and time travel and multiverse and all this crazy shit. Like, it gets boring. And people get tired of it. They don't want to go, they don't want to watch it. They're just like, oh, this is so, they want something grounded, right?
So now it's interesting you say that, because if you watched our reaction, well, not reaction, but our discussion, and then we did a kind of a follow-up after we watched independently the show with Echo. Marvel now has, what is it, Spotlight or Searchlight or whatever the fuck it is, that is the new, like, Echo is under that is key. It's supposed to be the grounded side of Marvel.
Right. The down to earth, like, more realistic, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, let me see real quick.
Grittier. I know what you're talking about. No, yeah, I mean, and kind of while you're looking that up,
yeah. So looks like it's Marvel Spotlight. That's what it is. It's Spotlight. That's the new kind of mini studio that is supposed to be like with Echo and all these things that are supposed to be more grounded, even though they brought in fucking weird powers and Echo. We're not going to go into that, but that is supposed to be because, one, they said, okay, now we've got this 30 movie universe that is too big. Like, you'd have to watch too many movies if you're just starting out, right? And like most people don't want to do that. Let's start over. No. So my thing was, why didn't you do that after Endgame? Because obviously I can speak for myself, and I believe Mantis, the channel's called You, Me, and DC. I am a bigger DC fan, clearly, than Marvel. But as far as cinematically, Endgame and Infinity War were masterpieces in the superhero realm of movies, right? They were great movies. There's little to nothing you can say bad. I mean, you could nitpick some things, but they were great movies, right? It was a great story, but it was a culmination of a lot of hard work over 10 years and 20-something movies that brought it to that, right? There is your time to reboot. And when I say reboot,
Yeah.
I don't mean just say, you know what, fuck it, let's make a new Captain America, let's do this. I meant just reboot, like, hey, in the movie, they restarted the universe. Kind of like if you watch the Arrow verse on the CW with Crisis on Infinite Earths. They rebooted the multiverse at the end of Arrow, basically, in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. They reboot, they restart everything, and it starts differently. Start that, right? And then if you want to go into more cosmic level beings like you're trying to do with the Eternals, then that makes sense, right? You can say, well, hey, you're bringing this in, and then if it's not working, just stop mentioning them. Let them fade into the background. But you didn't do that.
But that's the thing. Like, and yeah, like Gunn, like I don't think James Gunn's doing that. He wants to focus on interesting characters, right? He doesn't want, I mean, you can make the action unique, you can make the effects unique to kind of give that difference instead of just quote unquote raising the power level. Like we talk about, like we play games like RPGs, like, well, the new expansion comes out and what normally happens, like you have a new area, but also your level cap increases, right? Like that's how they get you. Well, like you can't just keep increasing the power levels. Like people are just like, well, how far are we getting at? Like how far does this go? So I don't think James Gunn's going to do that. I think he's going to focus particularly on making the characters more interesting. And I agree with you. Like what I would have done after that event, I would have went straight into the, not necessarily say Echo the way they did it. Like we've talked about that. I don't like what they did with Echo, but if you're going to make it, if you're going to go a more grounded type of thing, do it right then. Do it right then. You fall straight off. Now you're doing something completely different, right? You do the Jokers, you do the Batman stuff that DC's doing in the Elseworld stuff. You just do that right then. As soon as that cataclysmic event happens, okay, that's done. We're not doing anything with any of those properties anymore. We're going to start something new, something completely different, and you start doing that, right? That's what I would have done.
And I would have too, because again, you crescendoed, like you said. You hit the peak, and Endgame was a masterpiece. And you have seen, and all of us have seen, what followed has just been a train wreck. It's been a series of unfortunate events. It has not been very good. And it's because you did that, right? You went, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they should have kept going with different stories before Endgame and like not peak.
No,
they
need
going
to
keep running, right? You
want the payoff.
Well, yeah, not only do you want the payoff, but like you said, if you keep going, there's too many movies to follow in that storyline. So Endgame was a perfect time. Cut it off.
Cut them off.
Reboot it. Reboot everything, and you can take it in a different direction. Now you aren't focused on the Captain Americas and stuff, even though I know they're coming out with Captain America 4. Or if you want to do that, that's fine. That's a completely different universe, completely different storyline. You know, and you separate. But they didn't do that. Whereas with James Gunn, I think, and the big problem with James Gunn, and I think what he's trying to avoid is you have a lot of great villains. And the thing is, with these villains, you have a lot of storylines that are like that. They're cataclysmic storylines. You got to be very careful about what you do and which villains you introduce first, because you don't want to crescendo. You know, you don't want to blow your load, you know, three movies in, and then you're like, well, fuck, where do we go from here? Because everything else then seems null in comparison.
Yeah, I'll kind of finish up with this. Like, I think James Gunn has a villain issue, just not the villain issue that MCU has.
He's the exact opposite.
He has the exact opposite. His villains are so well known, and the stories are so good that it's almost difficult to I don't want to say put the pussy on its pedestal, but
you know what your problem is? You're putting the pussy on the pedestal.
That it's like these are so good. Like villains in DC are almost better than the superheroes. Like they're just that good. Like so it's hard not to fuck them up because people like them so well and they know them so well that it's like Star Wars, right? Like everyone knows Star Wars. Don't fuck it up or else it's going to be real bad, right? Like the villains are that way in DC.
If the problem is just what you said, we thought Star Wars was so big and so massive that, like, oh, you can't fuck it up, right? Like, there's no way because these are so iconic, and they managed to. Because and again,
you can.
You know, we're children. We grew up on the originals, and then when the episode 1, 2, and 3 came out, we're like, oh, holy shit!
You're thinking, people gonna die?
Right? Like, how did you fuck up our series this bad? And then the last 3 came out, and we're like, you know what? Like, give me more Jar Jar. Like, it's fine.
Prequels not
like,
that bad.
Like, yeah,
Prequels aren't that bad.
We judged a little too harshly. Like we didn't say that as a challenge. It wasn't like you know. But hey, we're not going to go off on a tangent here.
Yeah.
But that is a big problem with James Gunn when you have such great villains. Is that it's very difficult. Now, one thing is one of my favorite is Doomsday, and it's easy to because you can do a death and return in 2 movies. Just don't put him at the last 15 minutes of a fucking movie after you've had all this shit going on. Right. But you can do that, and it doesn't have to be a cataclysmic event, right? Versus if you bring Darkseid, even if you bring Brainiac, I think Brainiac's lesser than Darkseid as far as cataclysmic events. But you know, Darkseid, as much as we were this close to seeing Darkseid come to Earth and having a great like battle. He should be your furthest off thing right now. I think similar to what the Marvel did is you need to see hints, maybe just whispered. Like you don't even need to see because again, really for the most in the comics, Earth doesn't know of Darkseid until he really shows up, right? Yeah. So I don't want to if you watch the animated series of Superman, he shows up a couple of times, and the first time when he shows up, I'll clip it in here. Like Superman's because Calabat comes to Earth and Superman whoops his ass and stuff, and Darkseid just basically disintegrates him back to Apocalypse, and he's like, "Who are you?" And he doesn't even answer him. And then when he tries to get his face, he just heat visions it, or he omega beams him down, and he's like, "That is who I am." And he's just like, he gives this awesome speech, and then he just walks away. He just fucking leaves.
Who are you?
That is who I am. And when the time comes, you and this primitive planet will swear allegiance to Darkseid.
And then when he comes back the next time, he whoops Superman's. Like, that is the kind of shit you need to see, right? Sprinkled throughout. But he is going to be your crescendo. Once you do the Darkseid stuff, you're going to have to reboot or do something else because you've hit that peak. And that's kind of what worries me with the MCU is in 2026, you're like your next big installment, you're planning Secret Wars. That's another cataclysmic set of events. What are you going to do? So I'm hoping, I believe the fact that James Gunn's already, to the final thoughts here, that James Gunn's already talking about that means he knows it's a problem. And the great thing is knowing is half the battle.
Knowledge is power.
I was giving a brief pause because I'm going to cut in the G.I. Joe thing.
Now we know.
And like I always say, remember, you know enough.
No one's half the battle. But he knows that, right? He sees that. He recognizes it's going to be a problem. So that gives me hope. A new hope, one might say. Awkward pause for Star Wars cut in.
Yeah.
So, Mantis, final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Again, MCU had a villain problem. DC doesn't in the same way. And I agree with you. I think James Gunn understands this. I think he's probably got enough feedback and watched enough of the tragedies that have happened to understand where the strengths in DC lie. And it's just up to him not to fuck it up. I mean, it's there. It's like, it's all there. All the good stuff is there. You don't even have to try. Like, you just don't. You just have to not fuck it up.
All you gotta do is not fuck up.
Guys, and if you've made it with us this far on the video, we definitely appreciate it. Consider liking this video and subscribing, because if you do subscribe, you will see our other videos where Mantis and I say that phrase throughout. It's just don't fuck it up. That's all you have to do, is not fuck it up. That seems to be the central theme behind a lot of our videos. Is that's all you have to do. Again, it's written out there for you. You just don't have to fuck it up. But definitely like this video if you've made it this far. We're never going to ask you in the beginning. Subscribe to the channel so you will get more of our videos where we continue these discussions, especially as these kind of universes are now reshaping. I mean, I know the DCU is basically rebooting. MCU is it's heading that direction, man. Like it's
drowning. Let's be real. Let's be real. It's drowning. It was treading water for a bit. Now I feel like it's underwater. Like I don't know.
The MCU looks like Titan back here. Like it's just fun.
It does,
right? It just needs that clean wipe like Thanos did in the movie. Just the clean, put it right back to you. So, but if you are not subscribed and you don't click that fucking annoying ass little bell notification to get our newest videos, you're not going to see where we discuss all of this as we continue on this journey with you. So, Mantis, unless you have anything else,
I just want to say I appreciate everyone's support. Continue to like and subscribe and
comment. We love seeing the comments. We try to respond to everyone where it is warranted. We did a video that it was Mantis and I had discussed with Carl about Carl Weathers. If you haven't watched that one, RIP to him. But we didn't want to actually respond to the comments because we just wanted people to pay their respects, so it didn't seem warranted. But other than that, we do try to respond to all the comments because we want the interaction, we want the engagement, right? We want this to be a community where all ideas are welcome, right? You're allowed to have your own opinions here, free speech. So definitely thank you for all of our newest subscribers and everybody that continues to watch the channel. And until the next one, we will see you then.
Later.